And welcome everybody to another edition of Sports Talk New York, the Facebook Live edition. As you know, AJ and I have been supplementing our weekly radio show with these themed Facebook Live shows. So today we're going to do one on Sports Phone. And way back before cable TV sports networks, Sports Phone was a telephone service in the United States that allowed users to hear sports scores and information. Service was launched in 1972, and after initially failing, it was relaunched 3 years later. Service gained the following, and by 1981 had hit a peak of 50 million calls in a year. Sports Phone began in New York City, but expanded to other programming in numerous other locations, including Chicago and Detroit. The rise of sports radio stations and score tickers on television broadcast helped reduce the popularity of Sports Phone before an increase in internet usage led to its demise in 2000. Callers to Sports Phone heard messages of 1 minute or less with up to 30 scores provided in that update. In addition to scores, the service's programming included news and interviews along with a sports trivia game. Some information was recorded specifically for certain markets. The announcers for Sports Phone included future broadcasts of several franchises in the major U.S. sports leagues. We're thrilled to welcome 4 of them. We would have had 5, but Michael Kay is above this, so he decided to opt out. We'll start with introducing Don La Greca. Don began his career at Sports Phone, providing real-time scores and updates to users by phone. He covered all 9 local sports teams while working with Sports Phone. He later worked as a sports anchor at 1010 Wins. He has been with ESPN New York Radio, obviously the star of the Michael Kay Show from its inception. For its voice that listeners heard when the station launched on September 3rd, 2001. He's also served as the official radio host of the New York Rangers pre- and post-game show since the 2005-2006 season. Welcome, Donnie.
How are you, sir?
I'm doing good and great to have you here. John Giannone also started out at Sports Phone. He was a field reporter for CNN SI, spent 9 years as a writer covering the Islanders, Jets, Giants, and Mets for the New York Post, and the Mets and Rangers and Yankees for the Daily News. He joined MSG Networks 2002, worked in many roles, including play-by-play host, anchor, and reporter for a variety of games and programs on the network. He received 5 Emmys for his role in Rangers coverage between 2008 and 2015. How you doing, Johnny?
I'm great, Mark. Thank you for the intro. And I must say that I never made the connection until now. You said that Sports Phone hit its peak of 50 million calls in the year 1981. That was the year that King Wally hired me. So I'm sure there's a connection there.
Absolutely.
Howie Karpin started at Sports Phone as well. He has been a sports journalist for nearly 40 years. He's an accredited official scorer in the New York area for Major League Baseball, on-air anchor for Sirius XM Sports. I've had the privilege of co-authoring 5 books with him. It's a pleasure to welcome my good friend Howie Karpin. Welcome, Howie. Hold on, let me. I have to unmute Howie. Welcome, Howie.
Proud to be a part of this panel. We had some kind of talent factory back at Sports Phone, and as you can see, the guys have done well, so I'm proud to be part of this.
And rounding out our foursome is Mike Walshinsky, known to all Sports Phone callers as King Wally. He served as an area voice of the Knicks since 1989, replacing the late legend John Condon. New York Liberty since its inception. He has announced over 1,500 Madison Square Garden events. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here, Mark, and I'm even more thankful that John is here for, telling us that he singularly rescued Sports Phone from the dark, troubled times.
Yes, thank you.
All right. So, well, first off, let's just check in on everybody and see how they're holding up. Don, how's your family? And, I know you would not have wanted it under these circumstances, but I have to imagine for you it's pretty cool being home around the Twins a lot more than you would had if, all these sports were going on.
Yeah, we've been very, very fortunate, no question, because where I am in New Jersey, we have not been as affected. We had a couple of people at work at ESPN Radio be affected by it, but we've been safe here, doing the shows from home. And, yeah, I'm trying to spin it as a positive. These are very important years. My twins are going to be 2.5 on June 5th. So rather than traveling with the Rangers or having to leave for work every day, it's nice to be able to spend a lot of time with them. I'm sure anybody with kids will tell you there are times where you would like a bit of a break, but I'm going to try to take advantage of every second I can to watch them grow up. So it's been, tough some ways, but for the most part, I think we've kind of gone through this unscathed and really been able to have some really good family time.
Additional plus is less FaceTime interacting with Michael Kay. That's always a good thing as well, right?
Yeah, because he's been in a mood since this started. I got to be honest with you.
Johnny, how you holding up? And for you, also lots of free time now. That unexpected free time.
Yeah, a little weird. I'm actually hunkered down in Hilton Head where I have a summer place, which I expected to be at this summer at some point. I didn't expect it to be on March 17th, but I live in Hoboken, and they were one of the first cities to do a complete shutdown, and we sort of read the tea leaves there and said, if it's as bad as they're indicating, we're going to get out. So we came down here. We've been down here for a little bit. My daughter came down as well. She's got asthma, so it's probably better she got out of Brooklyn, which again was one of the epicenters. My sister got it, and she was laid up pretty badly with it for, she was symptomatic for 27 days. So we were sort of firsthand privy to how serious and impactful it can be. But thankfully, she's out the other end of it, and all's well down here.
Interesting you mentioned that. I just spoke to Mike Rappaport, who we all know, a big part of the Rangers public relations department, and his mom had it for 6 weeks. So, but she's doing well now, so that's good on that part. So yeah, we all know him, and we wish his mom get well quick. Howie, for you also, this is like your busy time of the season. Either you're at Citi Field or Yankee Stadium. How are you holding up, staying at home now?
Well, surprisingly, I'm not missing it as much as I thought. I've kind of gotten into a routine here at home to, have some sense of normalcy. I'm once a week on Sirius XM from my house, which has been kind of a unique experience. But I'm doing a night shift on Saturday evenings, and when it gets to 7 o'clock, I have to wait to record my update because the people are honoring the first responders outside my window. So that kind of bleeds into the recording, but obviously, that's a great gesture, so I don't mind. But it brings up just some of the logistics of dealing with working from home. Now, unlike, Don, who has 2 young kids growing up, my kids are out of the house, and they are not even in New York. My younger one is got married to a wonderful Chilean woman, and they live in South America now. They left on New Year's Eve. And my older one, my son Danny, is in radio digital marketing. He works in Austin, Texas, and he has asthma. So, we're kind of keeping our fingers crossed, keeping an eye on them from afar. Mm-hmm. But I've tried to establish a routine here at home. I exercise at least an hour a day in my son's old room. So at least I try and keep myself in some semblance of shape. I mean, I'll be 66 years old on Sunday, so thank God I'll reach that milestone. But I'm trying to keep a little normalcy in my routine. I admit I sleep a little later. I go to bed a little later now. I watch Donnie sometimes in the afternoon while I'm exercising. So, I have the TV on and things like that. Sometimes I put on an old ball game just to have it on for the sound, not even watching it, to, again, capture some sort of normalcy. So trying to cope and, I know some people that have had it. I don't know if you guys know John Lombambarder from Elias. Mm-hmm. He had it, and he was pretty bad, he told me, for 11 days. He said he was on a ventilator, and he was in the hospital. So, you're interacting with people that have had it. Obviously, a bunch of us know Anthony Causey, the sports photographer, who unfortunately lost his life. I mean, it's been a terrible stretch, but you're trying to cope and stay as normal as possible.
Absolutely. And Anthony was, we saw him around the Garden a lot. And how you just trying to stay, get a little edge over your softball buddies when and if your softball season resumes. Mike, unfortunately for you, this pretty much is your downtime because I can't remember the Knicks playing this late into a year anyway. But how are you coping?
Oh, well, it's funny. What was it? March 7th, 8th, we played Utah at the Garden, one of our last next to last home game, I think. And I got home, and I told my wife when I got home, I said, it's funny. Rudy Gobert was waiting to go into the game, and he was standing up, and where I sit, so he had his hands on the table right in front of me, leaning over. He was trying to stretch his back out, it looked like. And then I said something. I don't even remember what I said, but I said something, like small talk, right? And it was weird. He he didn't say anything. Okay. He didn't open his mouth. And then we had a stoppage, buzzer hit, he went into the game. And then 5 days later, it was announced that Rudy Gobert, positive for it. And my wife was in the car with me. We heard it on the car radio, and she said, "Is that the guy?" So now my wife swears that, I am in deep trouble. Luckily, thank God I've been fine. But I also thank God that Rudy Gobert never opened his mouth to talk to me while he was waiting to go in the game. But on March 13th, I have a townhouse in the Amish country, believe it or not. And that's where I've been since March 13th. My daughter is a physical therapist, and she treats mostly athletes in Westchester. They're affiliated with Dr. James Nicholas's old practice, which is adjacent to them. And she was seeing patients, and my mother-in-law just turned 100 years old yesterday. So we took my mother-in-law out here to quarantine her from my daughter. So I may never come back. Who knows the way this is turning out.
Unbelievable. All right. So the reason for this show, obviously, is Sports Phone. Let's all get in a time machine, set it for a time when my Expos jersey was actually relevant, a time before beepers, smartphones, TV superstations, before every sport and every team had their own TV station or app, before you could know everything that was happening in the world of sports in real time. Back then, we would call 976-1313, which is amazing. Every person of our age knows those numbers. With the second you say it, they know what it is. You'd hear a minute-long message with the latest scores and sports news. A half hour later, if you wanted another update, another dime, you'd call. So let's all start how each of you got to work at the legendary Sports Phone. Let's start with you, Mike. How did you come to work at Sports Phone?
I was working at WFUV as a sports director. Surprise, surprise. Mm-hmm. And it was my junior year, and there was a great guy who was the manager of it, who was actually a faculty member, Frank Seitz, and WFAS radio in Westchester, New York, FAS Frank A. Seitz. So his family had that station. Anyway, he was at FUV, and there was an index card on the bulletin board in the hallway of our radio station that said that, an old typewriter, an outfit called Sports Phone is looking to hire a couple of people to work for them. They're starting up in a couple of months. Anybody who's interested, please call. And the person to call was Bullet Bob Meyer, who, the Knicks statistician and famed track announcer at Yonkers Raceway. I interviewed with him and got the job. This was the spring of my junior year in college, and they actually gave me a full-time job. So I worked full-time at Sports Phone. My last year plus in college, I was the nighttime producer. We had two-man shifts generally. And I was the producer, the guy who gathered the news and the scores. And the announcer was the late, great Guy LeBeau, who I worked with. And a lot of people, know him. Years ago, he was on NBC, local in New York. He did their sports, ABC for a while. He taught me a lot. He taught me an awful lot. And it kind of moved from there, and after a while, I became the daytime announcer, and then became the daytime sports director, and then the program director of the parent company phone programs for a while. So that's how it all started.
Can you walk us through a little bit? Things were very different back then. It wasn't, internet online to find different things. There were wire machines. They were ticking. They were back. You had to wait for things to go and make phone calls. How did the process go of putting together a report? Where did you gather information from? Were you ripping things off of the wires, literally rip and read, or were you making phone calls? Just walk us through how that happened.
It was a combination. We had the UPI wire. We were taught to have relationships with the local teams as well. So we would pick up the phone and call. And some of it also was trying to get interviews with the players, cold calling into hotel rooms, and finding players in their hotels. So the news was gathered primarily from the UPI wire, but we were always encouraged to flesh it out, especially with local teams. We forged relationships with local teams. Some of them gave us a daily report, and we did a daily report. In terms of the scores, we had the ticker, sports ticker. We had a ticker machine and a couple of TVs. And what really helped our sports product after a while is that we started hiring stringers in every arena, and set up a phone connection with them, which made for some hilarious moments and some not very funny moments, but we started a stringer network all over the country, and especially the toughest part was college hoops, because you were getting a Dayton playing Virginia Commonwealth, and we were there, and that was very unique at the time, especially because nobody else was doing it.
It's groundbreaking, and I don't think SportsPhone gets the credit for how far ahead of the curve they were with the stringers and being able to call into locker rooms and such. Donnie, how did you start at SportsPhone? How did you find out about it, and what was the hiring process for you?
I interned at K-Rock, which was a classic rock station in the summer of 1990, and that was my internship when I was going to Ramapo College. And my friend Tim Reed got me the internship, and I got to work and meet a lot of great people. I was like on the fringe of, do I want to do sports? Do I want to do music? And this was the radio station that had Tony Pigg and Dave Herman. The Turtles were there, Flo and Eddie. So you got to meet some great people. And one of the people that I met was the DJ Maria Melito, who still works today. Tremendous talent. You know her?
Maria and I worked at the same college radio station.
Yeah, she's tremendous, and she actually gave me the best piece of advice I ever got in the business. She allowed me to segue between Bad to the Bone to Shattered, and I got such a kick out of it that I was on New York radio, and I got to segue between these two songs. I said out loud, I would do this for free. And she said, never say that, even jokingly. You never do anything for free. And I've always remembered that and kind of held it as to my heart. Her husband was Pete Walker at the time, and Pete Walker worked at Phone Programs. And in October of 1990, I was able to go out and work there, and that downloading all the porn, Samantha Fox line, Dial a Joke, the different lottery numbers, and basically.
I think we lost Donnie.
55th, third,
they shut him down
right in front of PJ Clark's, and it was awesome. And I kept begging Pete. I said, "You have to let me work at SportsPhone. I want to work at SportsPhone." And Pete's like, "Listen, Howie Karpin's in charge at the time, and he doesn't want to hire any new people because he said he didn't want to take the hours away from the part-timers they already had. When Howie moved on, Ken Martin took over." And then Ken Martin hired me. And I remember thinking, wow, I wonder why Howie never wanted to hire me. Howie, I don't know if I ever told you the story or not. And so when I got there, Ken hired me. And I'm like, well, why wouldn't Howie hire me? And everybody made the point to say, because Howie's such a good guy, he didn't want to take the hours away from the part-timers that were already there. And he didn't want to keep adding to the staff. I don't know if that's true or not, Howie, but I always respected you for that. But according to Pete Walker, you're the one that stopped me from working there maybe a year and a half earlier than I wanted to. And that's where I got started. And it was just it was an incredible moment. And I've got so many great stories. I mean, some of the best stories come from working at SportsPhone with all those great guys.
So I'm going to throw it to Howie before I ask John how he came to work there to piggyback on yours. But it's interesting that that's the advice that Maria Melito gave you, because at the time she was the general manager of our radio station, and I did a segue, which was Queen's Fat Bottom Girl, into the Rolling Stones, Ooh That Smell, and I got suspended for 2 weeks. So a little different on the segues, I guess.
That's a clever segue, though. I like it.
Yeah, well, I thought it was funny too, but she wasn't too amused by it. All right, Howie. So I'm going to turn on your mic so we don't get the feedback. Respond to why you didn't like. You're probably the only person in America that didn't hire Don La Greca. Go ahead, Howie.
Well, that's putting a stigma on me because Donnie's a very talented guy. I'm sure when I heard your tape, I had the same impression. But yeah, that's the story. I was kind of loyal to my staff. I didn't really want to cut back anybody else. It was not, if I may borrow a line from Michael Corleone, it was strictly business, nothing personal.
No, I never took it.
But you're a tremendous talent. If I knew what I knew now, but yeah, it was because I was loyal to my staff. The guys that worked for me, they knew a lot of times I was hands-on, and the higher-ups really didn't like that a whole lot. They thought I was kind of a shop steward at times, but I was loyal to my staff. That's the kind of boss I was. You put out for me, I put out for you, and I really didn't want to cut back. The people I had already. It was more a numbers game than anything personal. And I'm glad you didn't take it that way. As we look back on it, I started there 40 years ago, and I'm out of there 28 years. They kind of let me go in '92, so I haven't been there since. And this is the first I've heard this story from you, Don.
Good stuff. So, Howie, how did you get hired there?
Well, in 1980, I started as an intern at WMCA Radio, writing news. And then Bob Grant allowed me to write sports for his show. So he was the first one that ever gave me on-air credit for writing the sports. And then they had Sports Talk Radio had kind of gone into hiatus because John Sterling kind of left a bad taste in the mouths of the Strausses, who owned WMCA. They had the show for a while, and then there was no Sports Talk Radio for a number of years. So they brought Art Rust in once a week on a Saturday. So I knew they had the show. So I asked, could I work on it? Not asking for any money, just to be part of it. They allowed me to work on it. I became a little bit of a part-time producer, and Art Rust got me a credential for a Yankee game. So the first time I ever was a professional at a real ball game was with Art Rust. I think it was a Saturday game against when the Brewers were still in the American League. So I was thrilled to be on the field and everything. And I met Mike Farrell, who worked at Sports Phone at the time, was one of the bosses. And he told me that they were expanding and they were going to be looking for people. So thankfully, when I did get hired there, I was basically hired like Mike, full time right off the bat. So here I was, interning at WMCA in the daytime for a while, and then finally got into Sports Phone literally 2 weeks before I got married. So I had really no job with a wedding coming up. So it was kind of like, a precarious situation, but somehow it all worked out, and got hired full time. And I worked at Sports Phone from 1980 until 1992.
Amazing. All right, John, how did you get hired there?
I never would have guessed that Howie was only there a year before I was, but now that I did that, it's pretty crazy. So as Mike had referred to, as Tim Wally had said, he was a Fordham guy, I was a Fordham guy, so I assumed there was a WFUV pipeline. I actually got hired by Sports Phone early in my freshman year. I got there in September of '81, and I would say by December '81, January '82, I was hired at Sports Phone. I don't remember the specifics of getting hired. I must have gotten it through a Michael K connection, because Mike and I were pretty tight, even though I was only at Fordham for 3 or 4 months by that time. Mike was the sports director at the radio station. Then he was a senior. He was working at Sports Phone at the time. So I'm imagining it was his recommendation. But I do remember interviewing with Mike Walchewski, Gene Wally, and also Mike Farrell and getting the job. And one of the jobs that I had to do almost right off the bat was to monitor the hardware, monitor the machinery that kept alive on a nightly basis all of those different Sports Phone programs that were being done. And it was beyond sports, as Donnie said. There was adult content, there was horse racing, there were a lot. So basically, I had to babysit the machinery and ensure that it continued to work during the overnight hours. So as an 18, 19-year-old in my freshman year, I would get to work at Sports Phone at about 11 p.m. and I would leave at about 9 the next morning. I would do that Friday into Saturday and Saturday into Sunday. So my first real job in the business, I was sacrificing weekend nights at college when I was a freshman and out on my own for the first time. It was a phenomenal experience. And then as I was there a little bit longer, they sort of moved me off that and into a different position. And that was when Sportsphone had conjunction relationships with Chicago and Detroit. So the way we would get all our scores, and in a further answer to what you had asked Mike a little bit earlier, we would get on a conference call with the offices from Chicago and Detroit at about 8 minutes after the hour every 10 minutes. And we would just shout out what the scores were to each of the games on our slate. And then as soon as the final score was said, off the announcer went into the booth. So I was one of the guys who, before I ever got on the air at Sportsphone, would compile that information for the announcers. I saw Andy Roth pop up before and wish everybody well. I remember Andy very well as one of the announcers that I would give the information to because I was an 18-year-old freshman who, until WFUV, had never broadcast a day in my life, had a thick New York accent at the time since I grew up in Flushing, Queens, and clearly wasn't ready to be on Sportsphone. But it was a phenomenal experience to get your foot in the door at a place like that. And at the time I was working there, you had Michael Kay, who was there, Bob Papa was there, Steve Cangelosi was there. So those people who are all still 30, 40 years later, mainstays in broadcasting. It was a pretty amazing time to be there. Chuck Cooperstein was there. He's the voice of the Dallas Mavericks. I mean, you can go on and on. One of my other jobs was to gather that sound that Wally had talked about, cut it up into sound bites, put it on carts. They look like 8-track cassettes. Yeah. I'd have to march those carts down to WHN so that their morning sportscaster would have sound bites, because Sportsphone also supplied sound bites for other stations. And the morning sportscaster was Howie Rose, who was also a Sportsphone alum, who at the time was the WHN sportscaster, who then, when HN became FAN, stayed on with the Mets, and the rest is history. So it's just remarkable to think about 40 years ago how many people were starting their careers in the same building at 919 3rd Avenue and now are still very much a part of the business today. It's tremendous.
Needless to say, Kay would never give you that recommendation today because he's way above all that, right?
I can honestly say I owe almost every job I have in the business to my connection to Michael Kay. And I followed his footsteps. I went from Sportsphone. I got a job at CBS through a different Fordham connection. But then after I finished working at CBS, because Jimmy the Greek fired me, which is a story in itself, I got hired at the New York Post because of Michael Kay, who was there at the time. He jumped to the Daily News, which in no small part helped me there. And then when I got finally on television and achieved my life goal professionally in '97, I did it because one of Michael's ex-girlfriends was an agent, and she actually hired me as a client and got me that job. So, and then I basically, in 2002, became a field reporter for MSG, which was also a job Mike had. So my career parallels his in so many ways. And then once he became the play-by-play guy of the Yankees, he went off into a different stratosphere.
All right. So, Mike, how did you become King Wally? As I know, and we mentioned all the big names that came out of Sportsphone, but I don't know if you would say you were playing a game of word association if you said John Giannone, Don La Greca, Howie Karpin, Michael Kay, anyone, the first words that come out of their mouth would be Sportsphone. But I guarantee at least 90% of the people, if you said King Wally, the first thing out of their mind would either be the phone number or Sportsphone. So how did you become King Wally? And a request. Wait, before you do that, a request from the room. A request from the room. Can you say this is King Wally for Sportsphone?
King Wally for Sportsphone. Update time next to 10:20 on the big board. Two Yankees won after 4.
Yeah.
You know what? I have to tell you. I have to tell you. I mean, AJ and I have had Ronnie Spector sing on our show. Ernie Banks actually sing as time goes by, and the great John Amarante sing the national anthem. This topped it. I'm sorry. This is right there. So, but how did you become King Wally?
Well, believe it or not, the moniker King Wally was given to me at Fordham in junior year. Okay, I don't know if I've ever told this before. Probably. Anyway, in junior year, when I became sports director, we had about 35 to 40 people on the WFUV staff. So the guy who had preceded me, who had been sports director for the 2 years previous, was a guy by the name of Malcolm Moran, who wrote for the New York Times for quite a while, is a journalism professor nowadays, had been at Penn State. I don't remember, he's somewhere else now.
He's at Indiana University.
Okay, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
And Malcolm was actually my mentor at WFUV my first 2 years. My freshman, sophomore year, he was the sports director. And he put me on broadcasting games my freshman year. FUV was even then was stocked with talent and pretty competitive. Though most of the people when I was there really they went into radio and other really successful professional careers with TV networks, etc. But a lot of them more from production and behind the scenes. For example, a guy by the name who was a sports owner, John Martin, who you guys, almost everybody knows, recently retired as executive producer for ESPN Radio. You know, all the big games, broadcasts, and that kind of thing. So anyway, and John was on my staff there too. So anyway, I walk in, I take over from Malcolm Moran. I walk into the first meeting, fall of my junior year, in a classroom with like 40 people in the room. And Len Klatt, who was a senior at the time, guy by the name of Len Klatt, who also went into media and broadcasting, but not real sports. When I went to the professor's desk, he goes, "Oh," and he was a sarcastic wit. So I'm up in the front, and he goes, "Oh, there he is, King Wally," because there were 40 people in the room. Well, guess what? It stuck, and at Fordham, and then 2 years, later that year, as I said, late my junior year, I got hired by Sports Phone, and they said there was a guy by the name of Fred Weiner, who was one of the 3 owners at the time, and still is around, but he said he was always the creative mind, and he said, "Let's jazz this up a little bit, Wally," because my nickname was Wally, but not King Wally. And he goes, "Why don't you give yourself a name? Give yourself a name that's not this name." Well, that doesn't translate too well. So,
Especially
first thing
58
in
seconds.
my mind was King Wally, because I had been called that by Lenny Klatt at Fordham. So I went on with the first report, and I said King Wally for Sports Phone, as I did, and it stuck, and that's how it caught on. And Fred loved it because it was different, it was creative, it was fresh, and just the whole, it just rolled off the tongue, and we went right into the scores. So that's how it happened.
So if Sports Phone was a movie, it'd be called Gone in 60 Seconds, actually 57 seconds, which is roughly the time you guys got to cram in the Major League Baseball scoreboard, the results of tennis matches, the latest on trades, occasional mini interviews. 57 seconds is what you would get when you called from home and for that dime. So how did you prepare those 57-second scripts and reading them, and how did that prepare for your ultimate success? Let's start with you, Donnie.
Well, I think it was everything about the resonance of the voice, what you can fit in, what you couldn't fit in, because there were some days you'd work. I remember early on working a Saturday where you'd have college basketball, you'd have hockey, you'd have NBA, and you sometimes would have 50 scores. You'd have to move them over to 2-5-2-5, if you remember, Sports Phone Extra. And just try to buzz through all of the scores. And it really... It just allowed. It probably didn't work well for being like to actually do updates on the radio, because you're not supposed to talk that fast. But it allowed me to kind of know, like, sense how long a minute was. I've always been great with must hits in radio, because I consciously would know how long it would take me to do certain things, and so that kind of prepared me. And just the constant every 10 minutes, and if you guys remember NFL Sunday every 2 minutes. Of going in, doing the updates. I mean, it was an experience like no other. You could work at a small market radio station and not get that much experience. I always looked at Sports Phone as working in a small market in the big city, where you're not doing updates every half hour, every 20 minutes, every 50 minutes. You're doing them every 10 minutes. And that's what I think just allowed me to figure out time and just really just improve my voice and my cadence. It all came, I think, from doing those updates every 10 minutes consistently.
And the amazing thing, guys, too, is, and everybody who's done it on this panel will attest, when you go in that booth and you start recording, if you screw up and you hit the button to stop and then go back and start again, there is that short length of time where until you're done with your 57-second update, what you recorded and stopped halfway through would be out there. So there may be a caller who calls at that very moment who gets your screw up until the time you do it right. Now, I will say again, what astounded me when I first started there was how good these guys were at nailing that thing. We just saw Andy Roth again pop on. He said 28 scores in 57 seconds. Try it if you're watching this thing right now. It's virtually impossible to do with being able to decipher what's being said. These guys were awesome at it. And it really is, it's something that, even though it was the very first job and it's now virtually 40 years ago, it's something I still cherish being able to watch and then able to do.
Looking back now, and you look, Martin, you look at sports radio, it's call-in shows. You know, you have a direct interaction with your audience. What sense did you have when you were doing it of who was actually calling in, who your audience was? And to follow up, it was sort of divided between sports freaks like Mark and gamblers. So what sense did you have that you're helping, people who are actually betting on games get the information they needed?
One of the things that I'll say is when I was there, you got a good read, a good barometer by the people who responded to the quickie quiz. We did 3 quickie quizzes every day, 11:30, 3:30, and 7:30. It's etched in the brain. At that time, I would put on a question or whoever was, and we would have 3 telephones, 12 lines each in the office, and they would light up like a Christmas tree. Okay. And the first person who answered correctly, we did a little 20-second soundbite, put it on a cart. And, you could say whatever you want about the local teams or anything in sports. But we got, there was a group of them who were better at it than others, several dozen people.
You want to name one? One in particular, Kenny Albert.
Kenny Albert was one.
Kenny Albert as a high schooler winning at least. There you go, Andy Roth.
Yeah, Andy got it. Yeah.
2 out of every 5 that I would be the guy on the other end saying, "Sports quiz, what's your answer?" Like Kenny was always there.
Yeah.
And this is before the internet, so he couldn't go and look these answers up.
Kenny is the internet.
Yeah, right. No, some guys were amazing. And we would talk to them, and they would give us a good feel for what they liked, what they didn't like, not only with the quiz, but just our product. So that was very, very, very useful. In terms of gamblers versus callers, I can tell you when I was there initially now, when I took over the daytime shift, which would have been 1977, 8, the split, because we got hourly call breakouts, the split was about 1/3 daytime, 2/3 nighttime. Daytime meaning not real gamblers. We weren't doing much in terms of putting odds on or anything like that. And our stuff wasn't always the most accurate anyway, in terms of odds or the most current. I mean, there were other places to go. So people sometimes think that sports phone was 90% gamblers. In the early days, it most certainly was not. It was more 1/3, 2/3. What really changed was when corporations began to see how many calls were being made by people from their offices during the day. Mm-hmm. And then they started blocking us, and the numbers started eroding. And within maybe 5 years, it was more 25, 75, 20, 25% during the day. But I used to see those numbers every day as part of what I did. So that's how we kind of learned stuff. And by the way, if you were screwing up at night, the gamblers would find a way to get to you and let you know. So we would get calls in the office, and there's the famous call. We had a phone booth on the corner of 56th and 3rd, and there was that one famous day or night rather when I was working with Guy LeBeau, where the guy turned around, was giving us the finger because he knew where our window was, and saying that we were slow or we gave him we gave him a bad score, and so yeah, we knew what the people were thinking.
It's interesting. John mentioned that it gave you a sense of timing and cadence and all that. You can find anything on the internet if you search hard and long enough, right? And trust me, I've looked all over, and there's not any recordings of any of the sports phone, like 1 minute of sports phone. It's not out there. So I'm wondering if any of you guys kept any of your reads that you use maybe as an air check for jobs. Do you have any of your air checks? Anybody? Nobody.
I have a few. But I have nothing to play it on because it's on cassette. I mean, I got plenty of stuff on cassette. I just don't have anything to play it.
Wait, Don. It's not a cart. It's a cassette. It's not reel to reel. They still make cassette players.
I know.
Give me the next time we're at the garden.
Even finding a device. No, because I'm sure you guys are in the same situation. I mean, I loved working there, but you got paid nothing. I remember I got made into a supervisor, which meant I did New York exclusively, and I was in charge of the staff. And in 1994, that meant I made $19,400, and I got benefits, which I thought was important. But like that wasn't a lot of money. I was spending most of my money living in North Jersey, paying the toll at the George Washington Bridge and the Throgsneck and the gas. And by the time I buy dinner, I was basically paying to work there. So you were always thinking of ways of finding another job. And so, yeah, whenever you felt like you had a great update or you got a great interview, I remember the day Don Drysdale died. It was significant, and we got sound from Dallas Green, and I loved the update, and I still have it on cassette because I thought maybe I can use this and be able to get a job someplace afterward. And I'm sure, the first job I got probably was, working at Shadow 1010 Wins, probably taking an update or something from Sports Phone and sending it out. So I'm not sure about you guys. I'm sure you're in the same boat where, I recorded a lot just because I was hoping to parlay that into another gig.
So when we're all back, bring those cassettes to MSG. I'll digitize them for you. Because I selfishly, because I actually want to hear it.
Right.
But
Mark also still has an 8-track player. If you have that, he can do that. Anything, any format you want. He can
I have a Betamax.
But also, I've got to tape all those archives of Al Trawick doing a joke for the Cosmos, or a joke advertisement for the Cosmos. The Lee Elia sound. I mean, there was that box that had the carts of Lee Elia. That came from a stringer in Chicago getting that sound. I remember there was sound of like Bruce Driver talking about how the cold water, because at the Aud they couldn't get hot water. So I remember getting all those cassettes together too, and carts and all that. I still have boxes of carts. That's one thing I can't find anything to play it on because I did try to stick it in 8.
I'm out on that. I'm out on that. That I can't help you with. All right. So wait, this is also interesting. All right. So basically, the Sports Phone expanded, as you said, into other markets. The New York office also provided updates to markets in the South, which led some announcers to use pseudonyms. So John, I believe that you had a Southern persona. So could you give us a little bit of what Johnny Gannon sounded like?
No, I didn't. We didn't try to ham up our voice. It was just kind of an edict that if you were doing it in a different city, but you had an ethnic name, to go a little less ethnic. So I took the I and the E off from the front and the back, and Giannone became Gannon. I didn't try to ham up my voice. Bob Papa, who was there at the time, to this day, Jim Johnson, who was my college roommate, who's a producer at ESPN now, he worked at Sports Phone at the time. We all worked with Bob Papa. Bob, when he did Atlanta, was Scott Randolph. Now, Scott Randolph still sounded like Bob Papa, who basically sounded like Marv Albert, but his name was Scott Randolph. To this day, Jim Johnson still calls Bob Papa Scott Randolph to his face because of that. So that's basically what it was. We didn't try to.
So, on the other side of you is a guy who I will never picture you as Johnny Lee. So Howie, how did you become Johnny Lee?
Well, as John said, it was an ethnic thing, according to the bosses. They didn't want ethnicity to come through on the air, via your name. So they basically gave us pseudo names, and I became Johnny Lee, veteran of the Civil War, I guess. But that was my pseudo name on the Atlanta sports phone. We had about 6 sports phone lines coming out of New York. We had Rochester, we had Buffalo. It was crazy. There was one night the Rochester update anchor, which I think was Pat Harris, and he's on Facebook. I think he had to stay for that 33-inning Rochester, minor league game that had to go into the next day that had Wade Boggs and Cal Ripken in it in the early 80s. Rochester was updating that game, so he had to stay until they called it off for the night, and then the next day they picked it up, but it ended up going like 33 innings. That's what I remember about Rochester. We had a stringer, get this, we had a stringer in Buffalo named Bud Bailey. You remember the Natural, the movie? It was Bump Bailey, who was the outfielder who ran into the wall. Well, Bud Bailey was one of the most well-known sports guys in Buffalo, and he was our stringer in Buffalo. And I think that's where they got the name Bump Bailey for the movie The Natural, from Bud Bailey. Mike was talking about the stringers before. A lot of the stringers went on to bigger and better in the business. Roxy Bernstein in California was one of our stringers. Tim Mead, who now works for the Baseball Hall of Fame, was our California Angel stringer who would phone us scores. The late Carl Bean, he should rest in peace. He became the Fenway PA announcer during the time when they won a championship. He ended up with a world championship ring. Unfortunately, tragically perished in a car accident a number of years ago. So a lot of the stringers became, notable broadcasters in their careers. So the branching out of the people at Sports Phone is really remarkable when you think about it.
Did anybody ever make the connection saying, hey, I called Sports Phone from Atlanta and said, boy, that Johnny Gannon sounds just like John Giannone? Anybody say that? Or just want to?
Maybe nobody called from Atlanta, probably couldn't make the connection. So.
Yeah, Pete was one of the guys. I seem to remember that name for an Atlanta announcer, and I don't know whether that was Andy. Somebody will probably pop on and tell us, but I seem to remember Peachtree Pete was one of the main voices. That might have been Chuck Cooperstein. I'm not positive, but no, it would only happen, AJ, if a New Yorker was in Atlanta,
right, and had to make a call. Yeah,
I never heard of anybody, but I wasn't on in New York as much as the other guys were either.
So you mentioned the stringers, but there was other ways that you guys actually got information. I know that Daryl Sittler was on the air, not the air, on the phone. But Howie, you've also told me a number of times how you guys ended up getting Wayne Gretzky after he scored his 50th goal in the 39th game. Can you share that story with us?
Yeah, originally I got it mixed up. I thought the game was in Edmonton, but the game was actually in Philadelphia when he set that record. So a bunch of us were working that night, and as a goof, we said, let's try and call up, maybe get him on the air, on this milestone evening. I think Pat Harris was there that night. We said, let's take a chance. We'll call him up. Maybe we can get him on. We all thought he'll never come on, but we took a chance. We got in touch, I think, with the PR person from the Edmonton Oilers, and we said, can we get Wayne to call us back? He can call us collect. So a little while went by. I'm not sure how long, maybe an hour after the game ended, 2 hours. All of a sudden, the phone rings, collect call from Wayne Gretzky. So we left, and we said, yeah, who could this be? So we accepted it. Sure enough, it was him. It was Wayne Gretzky on the night he scored 50 goals in 39 games, and we interviewed him for Sports Phone. It was one of the best scoops we ever got on the phone. I'll never forget it, and to this day, I still think about it, and it's amazing that he called us back.
Howie, how are you sure that you actually had Wayne Gretzky, not somebody posing as Wayne Gretzky? What did you do to vet that he had the right guy and not make a huge mistake putting an imposter on the air?
Well, we were so thrilled at that time. We really didn't think about that. Who could have known to call us collect? Right. Because we were the ones who put in the call, number one. It did sound like him. And the things he said, authenticated who it was after a while. But, we weren't that suspicious in the beginning because it was in the 80s, you were kind of naive in the business so to speak. So you really didn't think anybody could have hooked on and called us collect. No one really knew about it except us, and only a little while went by. So, all things being equal, luckily it was him. But, you're right. It could have been a prank. That's why we laughed in the beginning. And we said, let's pick it up for the hell of it. And we never thought it would be him. That's the reason we thought that way. And sure enough, it was him.
Yeah, everyone should know this was pre-Captain Jenks days. So it was actually Wayne Gretzky. So, from everything I've read, the actual offices were a combination of a prehistoric sports bar / fraternity house. So, Don, can you explain what those original sports phone office looked like, and how many TVs did it have? Computers weren't a huge thing. It's not like everyone had laptops back then. So, did they have computers? What was the setup like?
Well, the setup, and I was exclusively in Elmont, New York. So, Howie, you remember you were upstairs, and then eventually a couple of years later we moved downstairs. But the setup was pretty much the same. There'd be this huge table, okay, and on the table there would be the ticker right in front of you from AP, and then there'd be the sports ticker, which would be on a computer, and the writer would stand in front of that and gather all of the scores, and then in front we would have. Probably like 20 television sets, and one of them would be hooked up to like local cable, but all the other ones would be hooked up to satellites. Now, this isn't DirecTV satellites. These are the actual satellites where you'd have to program T1, and then the big bird up on top of the building would move, and then you'd be able to get satellite. And then behind you were these closets that were basically studios where they would be filled with all of this soundproofing, and you'd have a microphone, a cart machine, you'd have the clock that you'd hit digitally to be able to count down, which I actually have here. If you give me a second, I think I can pull it up. And then you would start to know how much time you had left, and your headphones that you put on, and you'd go. And each booth was when I was there was New York, Chicago, Detroit, and then there was the national 900 number. And then a little bit later on that big same table, there'd be another computer. The Sports Phone Live came in, which was a 900 number where you'd be able to talk to a live reporter to be able to give you the scores live. You weren't supposed to give play-by-play, but you give it anyway. And then behind you'd be a table with Chinese food or pizza boxes. And, yeah, we didn't make a lot of money, but we had so much fun because we spent just so much time together, because you'd have, like on an NFL Sunday, you might have like 15 guys working. So it was, it's like a frat house.
Speaking of frat house, Howie, I know there weren't many women staffers on Sports Phone, but ESPN's Linda Cohn was among them. And I know you were around when she worked there. She retold the story in her autobiography that one of the TVs was usually always tuned to the Playboy channel. So obviously, I don't think in the Me Too movement and workplace and human resources that would fly today. But what was that like?
I don't know if I should be telling you this stuff. I could be implicating myself. Maybe I need a lawyer. But
don't do it, Howard. If it's
look, you had a bunch of young guys who were together in a room, for a long time. At that time it wasn't a real big room. It wasn't as expansive on 919 3rd Avenue as it was in Elmont, which was just a huge warehouse like lobby. But it was a small room. There were a number of, obviously Linda was the only woman there, and she felt a little insulted about that the channel was on, and we good-naturedly kind of busted her chops. Somebody came up to me and said that Linda felt uncomfortable that the Playboy channel was on the TV. She was a good sport about it, luckily, as I look back on it. But the person came to me with a request that we turn it off, and I kind of said, it stays on, house rules, and that seemed to gain some legs over the years, that story. But she was very good natured about it, and obviously a great talent as she went on. She was in a tough spot. You have to give her a lot of credit. She was like a pioneer, and a lot of women look up to her, and rightfully so. But she was, I think, our first woman announcer there at Sports Phone, actually doing updates. So it was tough on her. And, you know, you look back and it was kind of awkward for her, but, you know, she made the best of it. And obviously she was very talented as she went on to a terrific career at ESPN, and she's still there to this day. To her credit, that's tremendous. But yeah, that was a kind of a story with her early days at Sports Phone. Like I said, I may need a lawyer because I'm kind of implicating myself.
Well, you know what?
John Sorrell just said.
Yeah, but turnaround's fair play, because there's a story out there. I don't know if it's for John Gannon or John Giannone. I don't know which one it was. Don's broadcast partner and you went out on a double date with a pair of sisters, and it ended with the four of you back at the Sports Phone offices. Can you tell it? And you know, when I read that, for some reason, I just picture Oscar and Felix out on a double date with the Pigeon sisters. But could you tell us a little bit about that?
Super fascinated by where we worked, and you know, Mike and I had an uncanny way of describing Sports Phone to them. So by the end of the night, they were like, "Oh, we'd love to see where you work." And since I was working the overnight shift at the time, I can't believe I'm looking at King Wally right now and thinking, "Oh my God, I'm telling my boss 39 years later that I brought a girl back to Sports Phone in 1981 or 1982." But yeah, that was a thing. It did occur. Because again, my job was to babysit the machines once the last game on the West Coast was over and everyone went home. So I think Mike and I were out with together earlier in the night. Then I left, went to work, and then at about 2 a.m. I got a call from Mike at the office, which Mike knew the number since he worked there, and he said, "You want a couple visitors?" So yes, they did come up and visit the place. I showed them around, and if I remember rightly, one of the alarms started going off on one of those machines in the back, and I wasn't quite sure what I was supposed to do. There was a little bit of panic involved from a 19-year-old, but no, that actually did happen, and that's as far as that story will go.
Yeah. And actually, I just want to put in there, John, although it wasn't me, one of your predecessors kind of was involved. You weren't the first, so just so you know.
I didn't think I was, by the way, but thank you for saying.
So Andy Roth in the chat room said that, you know, Sportsman broke the Dave Winfield signing, which leads to a question. At any time when Sportsman actually broke news, did it bother you? First of all, did you get properly credited when somebody else picked it up? Or how much did it bother you when somebody took a story that Sports Phone broke and didn't credit you? Anybody? King Wally?
Oh, with the Dave Winfield story?
Yeah, well, just in general, that's one thing you broke, that when you broke news and didn't get properly credited, that really frustrated. That happened a lot.
Oh yeah, in the early days, you know, I think there was. You got to remember the landscape with some of the beat writers in those days were guys who had been beat writers from the 50s, you know, dyed in the wool. And I remember at one point, the late great Dick Young, in one of his columns in the Daily News, called us irresponsible babblers. I'll never forget that phrase, you know. So we had to earn our stripes when we were, you know, we had our Sports Phone microphones in the locker room. You know, there were occasionally some grumbles, you know, if we kind of inched our way in, even though the newspaper writers could hear the guys fine from behind us. It didn't surprise me that sometimes that didn't happen. Howie was talking before also about getting to, you know, Gretzky, and they knew this stuff was going on. They knew that we were coming on, and it was tough. I remember one time, and I don't remember who the producer was, getting back to the late great Guy LeBeau. He was the best at trying to find and getting people such as Wayne Gretzky, although he wasn't involved in that. One of our guys, and Guy LeBeau, once got Cesar Cedeno right after he had been arrested in the Dominican, and got him at the jail. And he was professing his innocence at the time to Guy LeBeau live, and we put it on. And it wasn't. I had nothing to do with it that night, and it bothers me that I can't recall. Maybe somebody else knows who's, you know, out there listening to this, you know, who was Sports Phone affiliated, can remember who the producer was that night. And like, that was, you know, groundbreaking. And you want to talk about, you know, getting a guy who was in the jail on the phone, and it was verified. I forget how that it was him. But we were doing this kind of stuff, and ultimately we started, I think, after a while, we did start getting the credit we deserved, but it took a while.
It's also interesting because you really, if you start looking at things like this, how, again, far ahead of the curve Sports Phone was. Right now, Stratomatic is pulling, a page out of your playbook, because when the strike happened in 1981, you guys simulated a 1969 Mets versus the 1961 Yankees in a 7-game Stratomatic series. Right now, Stratomatic is recreating this season because we don't have any. Whose idea was it to recreate that, and how much interest did that generate during the 1981 baseball season? Mike, you wanted to take that?
We had at that time a guy by the name of Mike Weinstein, who was on our staff. Howie will remember him. He actually is an executive with one of the large movie companies out in California now. Mike was a creative mind. We were sitting and our bosses were saying, guys, the sports phone numbers are down 80%. Think of something. And Mike and I, during lunch hour, would play Stratomatic pretty frequently in the office. And I forget which one of us actually came up with the idea. And the next thing we knew, we took it into Fred Weiner, who I mentioned before, and he said, "This is great. Let's try to do it. And let's play the series out." And we decided to take the 69 Mets and 61 Yankees, if I remember correctly. And next thing you knew, we the games that we played games 1 through 6 in the office, and they were totally legitimate. I was the Met manager, and Mike was the Yankee manager, and it went up 3-3. And then the next thing we know, for Game 7, they got Marv Albert to come in. He was doing NBC local TV then. He did interviews with us. We set up a desk in our big studio area. They got Arthur Adler, the Yankee producer of their telecasts at the time, become the Yankee manager of Game 7, and Thornton Geary, who worked in the Mets front office, to be the Met manager. And then Mike and I was the host, and Al Avery was another sports phone guy. He became the assistant manager for the Yankees, I think it was, and Mike Weinstein for the Mets. And we had a couple of TV crews come in. Marv came in, and it just exploded. And it was played live, and the Mets won, I think, in the 9th inning, 8th inning, and it was awesome. And then the proof of the pudding was the next day we got our call volumes for Game 7, and we got almost 250,000 phone calls that day of people wanting to, because we were updating it half inning by half inning, and we got like 250,000 calls, where we were getting at that time maybe 15 or 20,000 a day, because the strike was the strike. There was nothing going on.
So, I didn't realize that sports lasted to 2000. 1998, Fred Weiner came in, addressed the employees, and said they had to downsize and trim some fat. At that point, they gave Donnie a 2-year contract. Don, you moved the sports phone operations. You were in charge of paying staff, finding an office, overseeing editorial operations. How difficult of a task was that to try and keep sports phone afloat? And what did you learn from that experience from the business side of sports, doing that particular role?
Well, what I learned is never do it again. I was bad at it. It was awful. But I wanted to continue to do it. What happened was Fred brought us all in, and he told us that we were going to, what his plan was. And I said, listen, I've got some ideas on how we can move forward. I mean, we were still paying a writer, even though we were getting all the scores off of computer at the time. And I said, I think we can really downsize it and continue it, because it was on its way out anyway. Between the bottom line on ESPN, beepers, and then obviously the internet, it didn't have much of a shelf life anyway. So I wanted to continue to get paid, and so did a lot of other people. So the first thing I did was I'm like, I'm not traveling to New York anymore. I found a place in Franklin Lakes, New Jersey, which was 10 minutes from my house. And I went and got this direct TV, and we kept it going for another couple of years. But I was in over my head, paying taxes, and I was friends with all these people. So it was like a manager who had just finished playing, and I'm having to staff people and people complaining about their hours, and then using their friendships to try to get, better hours. And I found myself like filling in for guys and doing shifts myself because I couldn't get people to work, and it was overwhelming for me. But just the behind the scenes stuff, Fred couldn't have been nicer and really helped me along. But and plus I was starting to work at the Fan at the time. And I remember doing updates at the Fan in Astoria, and one of my employees calls me up and tells me he can't work that day. So between doing updates, I was running a back room at the Fan and updating Sports Phone because the guys couldn't work. It was too much, but it was fun to kind of keep it alive. I was able to, grab a lot of stuff from the old place, and I got like great pictures and a lot of equipment that are still in my mom's garage, the old cart machines and computers that I will not dare let anyone go in and see, because I can't imagine what those guys were doing when I wasn't there. So if anybody went into those computers, I'm sure I would be arrested just because God knows what they were doing. I can tell you, it's not clean enough for Facebook, but I can tell you sometimes I'd go into my office and there'd be pictures of what they were actually looking at the night before, printed out and put it all over up in my office. So I can imagine what's archived in there. But it gave me a real a flavor for what it's like how we had to go through. Putting a staff together of people. That was during the home run race between Bonds and Sosa, and making sure that we recorded every at bat so we could get the at bat of the record breaking home run so we can play it there. So just being on top of people, it just really it showed me what managers like, a new appreciation for it, and something that I never want to ever think about doing again.
So aside from what's in Donnie's mom's garage, any of you guys still have some of that amazing Sports Phone swag, the cool jacket or the softball T-shirts? Anybody? It looks like King Wally. What do you have, King Wally?
I have, I think, 2 Sports Phone jackets. I don't know how I got the second one. They were that silky satiny material. I definitely have those. They're hanging in my basement. And I have some old posters and pictures, and a bunch of stuff that I'm sure is hanging around somewhere that, other stuff that I haven't really looked at. For all I know, there might be some of the old, what we used to call slates, which was a sheet of paper of all the games that we were, working that night with score updates, and you'd use an eraser to put in the new scores as you got them. And they're lying somewhere in my house, but I haven't looked for them in years.
John, what about you? Anything?
Kenny Albert said he has 263 T-shirts that he won for the Quickie Quiz. For the next Rangers game and give me one. So that'll be the first Sports Phone paraphernalia that I have, other than the memories, which will last a lifetime.
What about you, Howie? You got anything?
Yeah, when I moved, John Giannone helped me move into the building I currently live in 1984, but that was a different apartment up on the 7th floor. 5 years ago, we moved down to the 2nd floor because it's a bigger apartment, and I was obviously going through my stuff. I found some old slates that I used to prepare from Saturday night college basketball. Donnie was talking about it before. We used to cover a total of about 90 games on Saturday nights during college basketball season. We actually had 3 lines, not just Sports Phone Extra. We had Sports Phone Plus, I think is the correct term. We'd have to move 30 or 28 or 30 scores over to that 3rd line. Those were the games that were played in the afternoon. And then obviously the main thrust was at night. So you basically had to update 3 lines, not all the time, but you had to keep them updated as the scores, advanced chronologically. So I found one of my slates, but to be honest with you, I didn't really save a whole lot of stuff. when I got let go in '92, my wife was pregnant with my second son, so I was not really very happy about the situation. So I didn't really hang on to a whole lot of stuff.
Howie, I just want to say two quick things about you because you were the greatest. First of all the guys who did slates, you had the neatest writing.
The
Whenever you would turn the best. I mean, the erasures were clear. He was the best. And plus, the best thing is, most of us, like I was a Polish Catholic boy, and we had a lot of Catholic boys there. Howie would always work double shifts on Christmas and Easter if he had to, by himself, because he was probably the only guy who was good enough to do both jobs by himself. He bailed us out of a lot of holiday issues as well. So I tip my cap to you, buddy.
All right, so we're gonna have to wrap this up because Donnie's gonna get on air soon. But again, another story that John Giannone is like all of a sudden sitcom central because that just story reminded me of Keith Hernandez helping Jerry Seinfeld move. You know that you guys are best buds now. All right, so in closing, we'll go around the horn to give your own personal favorite sports phone memory. So John, you can go first.
Honestly, like I said before, Mark, the fact that I was getting paid, no matter what it was. It might have been $5, $7 an hour, whatever it was. I was getting paid as an 18-year-old to do something that I wanted to do since I was 10, and that was to be a broadcaster. And for me, it was that is what stood out about it more than anything else. Just the fact that I was actually getting paid to do this. And, the people that I got to work with, like I've seen some names pop up. Charlie DiNatale was an awesome guy to be around. And Ken Samuelson, who was in the office every single night. He's the one who just reminded me that Peachtree Pete was actually Charlie Slows. Charlie Slows, who just won a World Series ring as a member of the Washington Nationals radio broadcast crew. So it was that. King Wally as my boss, and Mike Farrell and Howie Karpin. And I don't want to leave any names out, but, there's always so much talk about the kind of careers that were spawned by being in that office, but it really was the people who made that thing work on a daily basis. And as King Wally said, work it did when you figure 50 million calls in the course of 1 year is a remarkable entity. And for those who weren't around for it or can't conceive of it, it's a shame because we'll never have anything like it again. But, I got on the air there in 1982. I did not actually go on the air for my job until 1997. And in those 15 years, I never forgot what Sports Phone was able to do for me. Probably gave me the confidence to think, wow, I might actually be able to do this someday for a living. And I think that's what I'll cherish the most about it.
All right, Howie, let's go to you.
All right, well, breaking in at Sports Phone obviously opened the whole career for me, 40 years. But the thing I'll remember the most is I got my battle scars very early. I don't know if the other guys know this story, but John Martin sent me to a Yankee game one night, one of my first games I ever covered as a professional. We had a phone line there that we paid for, and apparently somebody, our producer from ABC, I don't want to mention his name, he would be accepting calls on our line, collect. So it got to the point where John actually warned me that this person, if he gets a call tonight, do not accept the call. So I'm at the ball game, and I collect call for this person from Howie Rose, who I don't know at that time at all. I never met Howie or anything at that point. I told him very politely that I can't accept this call. I was told not to accept any collect calls for this person. So this person had to walk all the way to the other side of the press box, the old Yankee Stadium press box where the writers were and the PR people. He took Howie's call over there, and then he came walking back to where we were, and I had the last row in that press box where a public phone was, the last seat on top. That's actually where Steinbrenner used to come out. He thought it was his good luck charm to walk out there. But anyway, I'm sitting there at the top row, and this guy comes back, and he stops before going down to the other rows, and he looks at me, and he says, if this wasn't the Yankee Stadium press box, I'd wire your effing jaw. I never met this person before at all. Never knew him. So I stood up. I was mad. I threw my pen down. I said, let's go. Let's step outside. After that, nothing. Never uttered another word to me since. But after that night, I said to myself, boy, is this what the business is all about? But I got my battle scars that night, and I got a reputation among the press box that I don't take any crap. I don't know how well that served me throughout my career. But anyway, that's what I remember most about Sports Phone, because it enabled me to get into the business, even the dirty side of the business, so to speak. And I got a quick lesson on what that was all about that night.
Donnie, I know you have to get ready to go on the air soon. So what's your favorite personal memory of working at Sports Phone?
Well, before I do that, just really quick, just the way Sports Phone's ingrained in my psyche. When I do the Ranger post game, I've got to do out-of-town scoreboard. I found this in my notes. I still write it like Sports Phone, where I circle
Yes,
the
you
winning
do.
score.
So do
Yeah,
I.
I still do it that way.
Totally.
Totally. Right? Does everybody do it that way?
Yeah.
It's like everybody did it that way. It's
100%.
crazy, and you have the starting pitcher next to each day, whatever. But there's a bunch of different stories. But I guess one of my favorites, and I was just talking to the guy too. I don't know if you guys remember Tony Matteo. Tony Matteo was a guy that used to come in and cut all the sound for us, and he's a fireman. And so it was '94 when the Rangers are battling with the Canucks for the Stanley Cup, and it's Game 1. It's the game where Ronning scored the game-winning goal, and we were horsing around. We played deck hockey all the time. We had no respect for the building at all. And I forget exactly who, but somebody put a hockey stick into the drywall of Pete Walker's office. And I had just become a supervisor. I mean, just minutes. Like I was just like maybe a couple of days before. So I'm freaking out. There's a hole in Pete Walker's office. What am I going to do? I'm going to lose my job. And Matteo, there was one guy, Brian Scott was there, and he was a construction worker on the side. He's like, I got some spackle in my car. We can spackle it. And Tony's like, no. He's like, don't worry about it. I got you. We got you covered. So he starts scribbling on a piece of paper. So I read the note. He writes a note to Pete explaining that the drywall has a hole in it because he saw a rat. And he took his hockey stick and he slap shot the rat into the wall and created the hole. And he doesn't appreciate working in such a filthy piece of garbage building that he's got to kill rats when he's trying to do his job.
Yes.
Thank you, Tony Matteo.
That's awesome.
So I'm like, wow. So the next day I get a phone call from Pete Walker apologizing to me profusely. Don, I'm so sorry you have to work under these conditions. We've called somebody up. An exterminator is going to come in. I really apologize. Please do not have this be a reflection on the company. So thanks to Tony, it spun it from I thought I was going to lose my job to the boss actually calling to apologize that this fictitious rat actually got in the way of me doing my job.
Amazing.
Oh, that is awesome. All right, Mike, your favorite personal moment.
Oh, there was a lot of them. You know, it's very funny. The one that comes to mind was one that was only indirectly involved with Sports Phone. And I was covering a Jet Bengal game years ago. Forrest Gregg, I believe, was Forrest Gregg, who was coaching them at the time. And some of you guys will remember there was a fledgling radio network called the Enterprise Radio Network, which tried to get off the ground. And when we used to go out in the field, we would freelance. In addition to working for Sports Phone, we would freelance, either getting some interviews or arranging something for interviews in the locker room post game for an outfit like Enterprise Radio Network. And they were national, and they went out of business pretty quickly. So they said, after the game, we want you to get the winning coach on the phone. So I said, okay. So I went to the locker room. I had to get Bengals sound anyway. So I called them from the locker room and I said, okay, I'm going to try to get Forrest Gregg. So I go to Forrest Gregg and I go to the PR guy. He says, yeah, go talk to Forrest. He'll do it. So I go to Forrest Gregg and I say, hey, I'm going to make a connection with the Enterprise Radio Network from this clubhouse phone in a couple of minutes. Can you go on? And he goes, sure. So I call Enterprise Radio Network, and okay, Forrest Gregg coming up at, 4:22, Forrest Gregg. And all of a sudden something happened. Forrest Gregg got into a fight or some kind of verbal altercation with one of his players. And 4:20, 4:21, the altercation's over. I go back to Forrest Gregg and I say, listen, can you, we're coming up. He goes, I ain't going on that thing right now. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. I'm not going on that. And just some expletives. So I pick up the phone, and here's the host. And I forget who the host was. He goes, okay, it's time for Forrest Gregg. Forrest, what do you have to say about today's victory over the Jets? And then I'm like stuck. So what I did was I go, I'm from PR. Forrest Gregg can't come to the phone right now. I'm sorry, real sorry. Forrest Gregg can't come to the phone. I hang the phone up, and that's the only thing I wasn't. I said, should I impersonate Forrest Gregg?
Yeah.
No, I can get in trouble that way. But it was probably the most embarrassing of my career doing that. But in terms of other stuff with sports, there's just too many incredible moments that we had.
So lastly, even though this is a sports phone tribute show and we could talk so many other sports, I want to really keep it focused on that. But I thought it would be nice if we could get you to say the words that so many of us are longing to hear. Then who better than the voice of Madison Square Garden? For those people that are sitting at home watching, if you could just welcome us to the world's most famous arena.
Oh, you're talking to me. Oh, okay.
Not me, I can tell you that.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Madison Square Garden, the world's most famous arena. Tonight, it's Sports Talk New York, Facebook Live with Mark Rosenman.
Oh, no.
Please welcome A.J. Carter. And at guard, the amazing official scorer, Howie Karpin. Ladies and gentlemen, the radio host who puts up with Michael K. every day, Don La Greca. And last and certainly least, the guy I hired, who to this day I don't regret, Giannone.
That is awesome.
Please welcome Sports Talk New York Facebook Live crew.
Hallelujah.
I now have a new ringtone. Guys, thanks so much for King Wally, especially special surprise guest, was great. John, Don, and Howie. You know how much I always look forward to seeing you guys at the Garden. Never more so than right now. I can't wait for that time when we're back together and watching the Rangers. And miss you guys. I can't say anything more than that. Truly miss you guys. Look forward to seeing you. And thanks for really being part of this today.
Ditto. Awesome, Mark. Thank you.
Awesome, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah, sorry I didn't hire you, Donnie.
Thanks, Mark.
All right, be safe, guys.
Thanks, Dan.
Miss you guys.
Peace.
You guys be well, man. Enjoyed it.